Okay, joining us now to, again, kind of set the stage for our show tonight, but now on a more St. Louis, on a local regional level, Mary McMurtry with the Gateway Center for Giving. So you kind of heard what we were just talking about on a national level there. I want to kind of get your perspective locally. First, I'll put you on the spot to speak for all of St. Louis. Are we, from your perspective, as generous as we like to think we are? You know, every time the Coleman race comes around or the Red Cross holds an emergency drive, we hear it on television all the time that we're very generous. Do you buy that?
I do buy that, and I think it's important for us to really celebrate in our community the really long history of generosity that we have and should be very proud of.
I knew there was no way you would say no, by the way, but I do believe you, and I appreciate that. What trends are you seeing locally here that you can tell us about? You know, in the last couple of years as we've been through the recession in St. Louis, is philanthropy changing in our town, in our region?
It's a very important question, and I think it mirrors what Patrick was saying kind of on the national level. But something that's very interesting for the St. Louis level is if you look at the giving pie, so the percentages of where the philanthropic dollars come from, 75% of the giving comes from individuals. About 5% comes from private foundations, and about close to 13 to 15% comes from corporations. That's almost the opposite of what we see in other communities like ours nationally. So they have much less dependent on corporate giving, a greater dependency and a greater asset base in those communities through private foundations. Mm-hmm. And so that changes the conversation for us in St. Louis really at the start. Regardless of what the recession does, that conversation was already changing, and we've needed to keep current with that and be responsive to that.
Okay, well, expand on that. What do you? How do you mean? What should we be? What should our conversation be?
So even before the recession began, we started to see the advent of corporate social responsibility for a lot of the corporations, and they were really moving from a model of giving because they were founded in communities, because the heads of those corporations lived in communities, to really thinking differently and more strategically about their charitable giving. And so that change was really coming for well before the recession hit.
Is that good or bad?
It's fine for them. It's absolutely in line with what they can do as corporations.
Sure.
But it doesn't have a net good or a net bad, but it means that we have to respond differently then to, it isn't enough to say, you know, I do good work, so therefore fund me. We have to figure out, how can I help that corporation? How can I help that entity advance what they're trying to do in the marketplace? And that's a different conversation.
What about our individuals? Are our individuals changing at all? Are our younger givers, if you will, changing? What do you see changing on the individual level?
So I think on the individual level, it's very interesting. And that's really in part where we see a lot of the generosity that we talk about. And it really bears out nationally as a comparison that Americans give more as a percentage of their overall net income than you see often in the national figures. So we have a very rich tradition. We call it giving while living. And we should be very proud of that. The challenge really is looking at, this is sort of one of the first times in our history that many of us can sort of say we have so many different giving entities occupying the same space. So you've got the traditionalists, the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, and the millennials, and then whoever's sort of coming online now. And all of them have different preferences and different styles and different wants and needs.
Different ways they like to give.
And different ways they like to give.
Different places they like to give too.
Absolutely. Right, so the traditionalists and the baby boomers and some of those were far more accustomed to showing up on Sunday morning and putting, their dollar in the basket, and that was, a big part of their charitable giving. And
right.
We see that, right, in looking at the lion's share of that 75% were to their religious entities. Young people coming online, millennials, are far less, they're sort of considered sector agnostic, meaning they look at charitable giving not just as this is a charity, a 501c3, but they think of it as an investment. So they're looking at social enterprise, they're looking at all kinds of other ways, social impact bonds, other mechanisms to do this sort of good, and feel that they have those tools at their disposal. They can go online and tweet money through their phone.
Text to the Red Cross during the hurricane.
And build a well in the Congo, right? And so that's they're plugged into a different kind of universe. They're also coming online, not identifying nearly as much as their the folks coming before them as being religious. They're identifying as being spiritual, but not religious in the same way. And so that's going to be an interesting challenge. And it just, again, it's not about less money, it's about that it's changing sort of how it shows up.
I want to ask you about how educated, is it important to be an educated giver?
It's a great
Is that possible to be an educated giver?
It's probably one of the best questions, and in some ways one of the most difficult to answer. And I think that a lot of people have different ideas about what it means to be an educated giver. And I think certainly we would talk to folks about, do your research, know your organization, know your mission, Charity Navigator, GuideStar. There's some wonderful national resources. Here, our local United Way has quality standards that they use with their agencies, and we find those are really helpful tools. And the Better Business Bureau also has their standards that they look at. What I really recommend to folks coming online is don't have those be the end of the conversation. Have those quality standards, have those percentages be the start of a conversation. What you want to know is not what's the percent of admin and overhead. Oh, it's too high, I'm not going to give to you anymore. To be able to say, tell me why that is and why that's important, because maybe your business model is different and you have children in a residential setting as opposed to children in an aftercare setting where the laws are different. And so what it's going to cost you to do those programs looks different.
I set you up.